forward to bringing Starlink to India as well. So, the Starlink internet, which I think can be incredibly helpful for sort of remote or rural villages.
Prime Minister Modi is a man whose time has come at the time that India's time has come.
It was wonderful, and I also commended India on the response to COVID and how India was very efficiently dealt with it.
We talked about the importance of successful urban development and the things that the government really needs to do to help lead in urban development.
Hello, welcome to our special broadcast on Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Prime Minister led the International Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters. He will be heading to Washington, D.C. later tonight and holds bilateral meetings with the U.S. President Joe Biden. The areas of focus are likely to include defense cooperation, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, clean energy, technology, semiconductors, among others. The war in Ukraine and India's ties with Russia will also be in focus. The Prime Minister has said that India is not neutral and stands on the side of peace. U.S. National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby has said that U.S. will welcome third-party role in Ukraine peace process as long as it is sustainable and commits to the UN Charter on Territorial Sovereignty. Also in focus will be tensions with China and India emerging a key player in the U.S. mission to secure the Indo-Pacific region. And joining us now to take this forward, I'm now joined by Rick Rossow, Senior Advisor at the Center of Strategic International Studies, and Jagmohan Raju, Executive Director at Wharton, co-sponsorship of Indian School of Business, Wharton Business School. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Rick, let me begin by asking you, what kind of a direction do you see Indo-US ties taking after this visit? It has been said that the deals on defense, on semiconductors will be unprecedented. But in terms of moving together geopolitically, how will the two sides work together?
Well, we need to make sure that we're really hitting each other's core interest. And, as the United States is the larger and stronger partner, we need to make sure that we're giving more than we get, I think, to be able to unlock further steps in the relationship. So, let's talk about what India's agenda would be for a visit like this. They want additional investment to make in India become more successful. And a lot of the C-level meetings that Prime Minister Modi's been doing already really have probably more to do with that than meetings with government. But in meetings with government, to make sure that the United States is accelerating the transfer of technology related to defense equipment, that we're coming up with shared initiatives to try to break China's stranglehold on global control of key technologies like quantum computing and others that you just mentioned, and also on defense relations. We both agree China is a big threat. The Indo-Pacific is a theater. But underneath that, we have very significant differences in terms of which of the sub-theaters we consider most important. United States, we think of Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and others. India looks at its own border area as well as its maritime neighborhood. So finding ways to bridge those gaps as well. So those are some of the big items on the agenda for the visit.
Right. Professor Raju, you were among the academicians, foreign policy experts, economists who called on the Prime Minister yesterday. Give us a sense of what was the message from the Prime Minister and what did you try to convey to him?
So, Parikshit, thanks for having me on the show. I think the Prime Minister's message was absolutely clear. He wanted skill development as his agenda, and he also wanted to have education at scale by focusing on digital learning. So I think he was very candid in terms of what he conveyed to us. And we also mentioned to him all the success stories that we've had in the Indo-US partnership on the education side, going back all the way to IIT Kanpur, IIM Ahmedabad, and IIM Calcutta with the Sloan School, IIM Ahmedabad with the Harvard School, and more recently, the one that I've been involved in quite a bit is the Indian School of Business from Wharton side, which is all success stories of Indo-US partnerships when it comes to higher education. But what he was also interested in is making sure we can do it at scale and not just for a few people. And he made that very clear. And skill development was his primary agenda because I think soft skills are most critical as India has to grow. And it was really nice to see Prime Minister's clarity in terms of his goals and the government giving us whatever we need to move things forward.
Right. Professor Raju, India and US have a collaboration when it comes to education and skilling. How do you see the collaboration between universities going forward? If I were to ask you as an academic, what are you hoping for from this meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister when it comes to educational ties between universities of the two countries?
So, Parikshit, the Prime Minister reminded us that we've created in India a zone where foreign universities can come in. Unfortunately, the success of that has not been to his expectations. So he wanted us to give some ideas on how we can do these things better. And I think one of the ideas, at least what I suggested, was just like we have sister cities, why don't we start sister universities? So, any big building is always easy to make if you have a foundation ready. And every foundation starts with a brick. So start in a way that universities in the US and universities in India can get to know each other, get to learn from each other. And then again, investments in India can happen. So my hope is from that meeting with President Biden, both sides will facilitate these kinds of partnerships, and the governments on both sides will support those.
Right. Rick, if I were to ask you once again, how different is this visit of Prime Minister from his previous visits to the United States? And also, if you were to look at day one, the kind of people, the wide variety of people he's met on day one, what does that go to show about his priorities during this visit?
Well, in talking to people behind the scenes that have actually been involved in the negotiations for concrete agreements and deliverables, they continue to point out the fact that getting difficult things done is far easier today than it was even on previous visits. So it seems like they're behind the scenes, they're actually talking up the number of concrete deliverables rather than most of the time they're trying to level set expectations. So we're all going to be happily surprised when the actual announcements get made. Parikshit, I think that's for two significant reasons. Number one, I think the threat that China poses has really driven us together faster than we might have expected 5 or 7 years ago. The border threats India sees along its own region, the threats to India's smaller neighbors, as well as some of the concerns we see in areas like Taiwan. The reasons for our security cooperation to deepen are only accelerating over time as we see China grow and become more belligerent. But also COVID, and some of that's related to China, but simply the fact that we relied too heavily on certain supply chains that didn't have that kind of diversity. So for a couple of reasons, I think both governments come into meetings like this with ready to do more deals and ready to get business done faster than ever before. So that's obviously, really significant. But of course, nobody knows exactly what's going to transpire until we see the final set of agreements get released, and we're just hours away from that.
Right. I would like to specifically ask you about the defense agreements. And we've really seen India-US strategic and defense collaboration growing since 2005 with the nuclear deal. And you had a series of enabling agreements in the defense sector since 2012, 2014. But why hasn't the technology transfer or the defense cooperation between India and US not really taken off? And yes, it is being said that this visit will really usher in a new era in industrial cooperation between Indian companies and US companies in the defense sector. But what are some of the regulatory hurdles we need to cross and what are being worked upon? As an expert, Rick, who looks at this very closely, what are you watching out for in terms of the fine print on defense?
Well, yes, certainly the United States has a very restrictive set of policies controlled by the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of State, and U.S. Department of Commerce in terms of sharing critical defense technologies. Now, the times that India's asked for advanced technology, we've signed agreements, we've been able to expedite and accelerate programs. But a lot of what India wants isn't simply the United States' willingness to sell and share that, but actually to co-develop next generation. And that's where things get particularly tricky, Parikshit, because as you know, In the United States, most defense production is actually held by the private sector. So it's virtually impossible for the Indian government to show up to engage the U.S. government and to talk about channels on sharing the intellectual property that underpins advanced American weapon systems. You need the private sector at the table for that. And for the private sector to share that on something other than commercial terms is really taking a bit of a leap of faith that maybe the commercial interest would be larger later on, or whatever it kind of takes. Now, you have seen across successive administrations in the United States a willingness to push the envelope faster than we have with any other country, including treaty allies, to try to accelerate and get the private sector excited about sharing intellectual property behind defense equipment. And even like this jet engine program that we're talking about as a potential deliverable for the visit, that was first brought up when President Obama visited India for Republic Day back in 2015. They created a working group. They had a number of meetings. Very little progress was made because, again, trying to come up with a deal outside commercial terms is not easy. And here it looks like just the re-announcement of this work stream back in January. Here we got the visit taking place in June, and it looks like they may be close to concretizing an agreement. So things on technology sharing that even 7, 8, 9 years ago were difficult to move on, even if there was some willingness, are moving at a pace that we've never seen before. So pretty excited for what we might see tomorrow.
Right. Okay. Very briefly, Rick, could you give us a sense of what are we not getting, what the US would be curtailing in terms of technology transfer to the to HAL? We hear about 80% tech transfer. What are we not getting in this deal?
Well, all we've seen is the announcements from the two companies, and it sounds like, GE does have a glide path that they want to include in this for moving to other areas that may not be part of the original package. But it's difficult to say exactly what's going to be offered and what's not going to be offered. But it does look like they're at least holding out the idea that they may, whatever pieces and components aren't going to be part of the original package for co-development, could be on the table for negotiation later. And of course, if this moves and if ultimately, this results in GE winning pieces of business that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise in the future, you may see other U.S. companies that have embargo technology actually approaching the Department of Defense and looking to get their issues on the radar screen as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Rick Rossow and Professor Raju, for joining us here on CNBC TV18. We are going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. When we return, we'll get you a discussion with Gautam Bambawale, former Indian ambassador to China, Pakistan and Bhutan, when we are back. Let's now focus closely on Indo-US ties, defense ties, and try to understand if Prime Minister's visit will herald a new dawn for the ties between the two democracies. While India has for long battled for cutting-edge US technology, there is still some skepticism among American strategic community on India's commitment in case of a face-off between US and China in the Indo-Pacific. Joining us now is Gautam Bambawale, former Indian ambassador to China. Ambassador Bambawale, thank you very much for joining us from the United States. Let me begin by asking you, there has been a lot of discussion on Ukraine-Russia war ahead of this visit. The Prime Minister himself said that we are not neutral, we're on the side of peace. We'll do everything to bring this war to an end. John Kirby, the spokesperson for the US State Department, the National Security Coordinator as well, he went on to say that we are welcome to any kind of third-party intervention. Will India offer to play such a role in the Russia-Ukraine war?
Look, Parikshit, happy to be on your show. Thank you for having me. The question that you've asked is something on which the United States and India come at from differing perspectives. And that is only normal because of the fact that we're in different parts of the globe. And we have now reached a stage where the India-US relationship is mature enough and also broad and deep enough for us to live with areas in which we may not see eye to eye. Yes, the United States may like India to have taken a different view of the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Unfortunately, given our position, given our realities, we have had to take something else. Whether India can actually participate in a resolution of this crisis is something that only time will tell. And really, I cannot look at the stars and foretell whether India will actually play a role in the, resolving the U.S.-Russia, the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Right. Now, in terms of our tensions with China, we have a border conflict. U.S. has a economic competition with China. How do you think the conversation with China will go, and how would India like to strengthen itself in the long term with this visit?
Look, I would like to start, Parikshit, by saying that, we must look at India-US relations on their own merits and on their own strengths. Yes, I do not disagree that there is the China factor, which is bringing us together, which is further cementing the close ties between India and the United States, the two largest and biggest democracies in the world. But I would not overplay the China factor either, because of the fact that there is a certain momentum which has now been gained in India-US relations over the past 20 years through 3 prime ministers in India, through 5 presidents on the United States side, starting from President Clinton and right down to President Biden on the Indian side, starting with Prime Minister Vajpayee, through Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and now with Prime Minister Modi. And it is these last 20-odd years or 20 years where our two countries have got much more comfortable in working with each other, in dealing with each other. And by that, I not only mean about the top leadership of our two countries, but also the bureaucracies, the militaries, the firms, the companies, and even ordinary people in meeting each other halfway. So I think that is something that we have to keep in mind, that the China factor is there, but we should not overplay it.
Right. Ambassador Bambawale, we're having a range of conversations on AI, on semiconductors, on defense, on quantum computing, 5G, 6G, Open RAN. Which among these do you think will be the big priorities during this visit where we will see substantial takeaways?
No, you are absolutely right, Parikshit. This is the new area or the new aspect of India-US relations. And in fact, the current visit by Prime Minister Modi will be looked upon later as an inflection point in India-US relations, because the two countries began discussing and actually implementing transfer of technology, not just the jet engines, but in all the areas that you mentioned, whether it's AI, Open RAN, 5G, 6G, computer chips, etc., etc. So I think this particular visit by Prime Minister Modi is an inflection point where sharing of technology by the United States and India is something which is a new aspect of the bilateral relationship. And therefore, this particular visit by Prime Minister Modi is an inflection point in the bilateral relationship, which is taking it into a higher orbit, into a higher trajectory. And the results of this cooperation will be seen in the years to come. Which of the areas will see immediate results? I am not 100% sure, but only time will tell, and the work of our scientists, technologists, and others will tell.
Right. Ambassador, how significant do you think is this investment by Micron Technologies into India? They're going to make an investment of $2.7 billion in testing and packaging related to semiconductors. Also, a very critical meeting between Elon Musk and Prime Minister Modi. He's not committed anything immediately, but we do know for a fact that over the last 1 month, there have been numerous meetings between Tesla representatives, the Prime Minister's office, and the Ministry of Heavy Industries, the Road Transport Ministry. How important are these meetings, according to you? And do you really expect Tesla to come, and should we make some concessions for them?
Very, very important. The Micron investment, which was announced and which was approved by the cabinet in India, is in the area of semiconductors and chips. It's an area where India has been trying to make efforts over quite some time now. But the recent effort, which has started just a few, maybe a year back, is something which we hope to see right through to fruition. And in that sense, the Micron investment, the Micron setup is going to be very, very important. It's only going to be the starting point of what we hope will be a longer and more detailed investment by companies from all over the world. So Micron, very, very important. The meeting yesterday with Mr. Musk, of course, I think was also something which is critical. India will come at this in its own way. Yes, Tesla probably requires some sort of support from the government of India, but we'll have to wait and see how that works out. But I believe that this is the time where the United States is making a big bet on India as an alternate source for manufacturing apart from China. And all of us in India, not just the government, but also firms, companies, and each one of us, ordinary Indians, must try to contribute to making this a success so that manufacturing as a proportion of our GDP grows, which is what the Make in India program is all about. So I'm very, very positive. I'm very, very,
all right.
I think this is going to be something good for us.
All right, Ambassador Bambawale, thank you so much for joining us here on our program, giving us your view on why these meetings between Elon Musk and Prime Minister Modi, why the micro investment are very, very critical for India. With that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.